kick us off. Okay, my name is still John Sharp. Pronouns are still he and him. Kathy, listening to your talk where you said, whence we come, I've decided that the song Cotton Eye Joe should be the theme for a genealogist. Where did we come from? Where did we go? So, yeah, sometimes my mind goes wandering and I'm not sure when it's coming back or if. So, I never thought I'd be a genealogist. My mom would tell me about her genealogy explorations, and I would say, that can't be right. That's wrong. You don't have enough information to say that Bob was Jim's father. You're doing this all wrong. So that's what drew me in, trying to fix all of the mistakes in her assumptions about who was who. And as I got deeper into working on this, I started to get hooked. As I think about it, that was probably my mom's intention in the first place. I think I've mentioned before that she's an ornery old girl, and she's very tricky and crafty. She is not to be trusted in anything. So she's pretty amazing. So what drives those of us who pursue the history of our ancestors? I think it's because we're masochists, mainly. Genealogy it's hard, it's time consuming, it's constant research, it's digging through old documents, learning something, but wondering if it's true and wondering how you're going to prove it's true or not true. It can be very frustrating at times, beating your head against these brick walls. But there are days, yes, there are great days when you find a little crack in the wall and you chip away and all of a sudden the wall falls and you're 2, 3, 5 generations back from where you thought you would never go. So most of genealogy is just the collection of dry facts. And, one of my ancestors, Barney, lived in Philadelphia, Mississippi in 1930. If you don't know where Philadelphia, Mississippi, just think the 3 civil rights workers who were killed. They were killed in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where I was born. His wife was Katie Lee. They had children. Here are their names. Barney was born in Mississippi, Katie in Alabama. So it's just this constant, ever-growing pile of facts that you keep putting together. But as you get to looking at the facts after a while, you begin to see the stories behind them. You begin to see your ancestors in the context of history. The battles of Shiloh and Corinth during the Civil War mean a lot more when you have ancestors who fought and died on both sides of those battles. To see an ancestor who was born on the Trail of Tears dropped off with missionaries because her parents thought they would never make it to where they were being removed to in the middle of winter. And she never knew who her parents were or anything else. To see Quaker ancestors fleeing danger from the Church of England, seeking freedom to worship as they wanted in the New World, only to find religious oppression already in the New World waiting on them so they could be harassed here too. So I started out doing genealogy, trying to find out who my original ancestors were, where they came from in the old world and when, and that's still a driving force. But I'm beginning to look for that glow of joy and contentment that when I find a lost ancestor and bring them back from obscurity. As you think about it, once we're dead for 2 or 3 generations, there's no one alive that knows us, knew of us, ever met us or anything. No one, we're just slowly forgotten over time. It's a lot like that movie Coco that I mentioned during Time for All Ages. It's death for the dead. I guess. So in that state of mind, I'd like to introduce you to my second great-grandmother. So Mary, if you could put it into presentation mode. Down there at the very bottom of the screen, kind of in the middle of it, you see the little slide screen like you were used to show 8mm movies on very, very bottom, middle of the to the left of that, just to the right one, just click over to the right, you go, you got it. there they are. Thank you. Okay, so the unhappy-looking woman towards the right is Marilda Caroline Jeffries. This picture was taken about 1904, 1905. Marilda was born in Alabama, October the 8th, 1864. The Civil War was raging. Sherman had already burned Atlanta at this point, after burning through northern Alabama, where Marilda lived. So everything was destroyed. She was born into a world of death, destruction, chaos, hunger, deprivation. If you watch Ukraine and you feel bad about what's going on there, it was worse in the South. Sherman and Grant had decided to destroy everything, to not leave a single thing that would feed anybody. So this is the birth of modern genocidal warfare here. And I'm not saying that because I'm a proponent of what the South believed in. I'm just telling you this is what happened. So this is the world she was born in. So we can trace Marilda and her birth family, then her marriage to my second great-grandfather, there on the far left, then the growth of her own family. Marilda's husband died in 1916, and she moved in with some of her kids in Howe, Oklahoma, which is near the Arkansas border soon after. And in later 1930s, she followed one of her children to California. And I had hints that it might be in just south of Fresno, California. But as I thought about this, I was thinking, what would drive someone from Oklahoma to California? And then it hit me, I have grapes of wrath Okies in my family. The Dust Bowl had hit the middle of the country. There was a depression on. So it appears they left Oklahoma and went to look for greener pastures in California. But if you've read The Grapes of Wrath, you know they didn't have a great time of it. And they were very much discriminated against. As some of you know, I took a big road trip earlier this fall to visit family in the Deep South. And on the way back, to make a very long story short, I found her grave. Next slide, Mary. Okay, it's a tiny little stone, about 6 inches by 12 inches, and it took a really long time to find it. I had to go to the county clerk's office to get a death certificate and had to prove I wasn't a descendant. And then I wandered around a very large graveyard until some fellow took pity on me and asked me what I was doing, and had a little app on his phone that directed us, and then we wandered around for another 30 minutes to find it. So I'd like to replace this stone, but it's amazing the hoops you have to jump through to replace a gravestone. I have to have all of her living ancestors, the majority of her living ancestors, sign a notarized letter granting me the ability to replace her stone. So it's probably not going to happen as much as I would like to. But the feeling of finding her, marking the GPS coordinates, putting it on Find a Grave, saving that information, means that now everyone is going to be able to find her. It's amazing. We started with dry facts. We kind of put them in the context of history, and we began to understand her story a little more. There's a ton more I haven't told you about her, but she is now reconnected with her family. No one had been able to find her grave. I don't know, maybe no one looked for it, but no one had found it anywhere. So people now in 5 generations, as long as Find a Grave is up there, they're going to know where she is, so people can know her story. And that's really why I do genealogy, is to help the ancestors. Thank you.
My name is Diane Larson, and the reason that I made my way up to the chancel without tripping is that my Grandpa Larson taught me how to tie my shoelaces. He also tried, in vain, to teach me how to whistle. It's only in the past few years that I've realized how much else I've learned from him, not directly, but by example. His full name was Howard Levander Larson. His parents were Anders Larson and Anna Klasdotter. Women kept their own names in Scandinavia. They did not change their names when they got married. They were immigrants from southern Sweden, and for them the future must have seemed promising. Howard was born in 1895, followed by his brother Reuben a year and a half later. Yet by the time the boys were ages 4 and 5, they had been placed in the Minnesota State Orphanage. Within the next 3 years, they both were contracted out as indentured servants to different families in separate counties. Anna and Anders' dreams of a better life in America were shattered. What on earth had happened? My older brother and I have spent 9 years doing genealogical research online. As best we can tell, Anna suffered from postpartum depression after the birth of each of her sons, most likely actually postpartum psychosis after the birth of her second son. She ended up being committed to the state insane asylum, where she died 10 years later. For a few years after Anna's committal, her husband, Anders, tried to take care of the boys, apparently with the help of her brother. They couldn't manage. My brother found an ad that Anders had placed in the local newspaper. Wanted, a housekeeper of some experience who can take care of 2 small boys. We have a copy of a letter that the boys' father wrote to the orphanage less than a year after their placement, after the boys' maternal aunt had come from Sweden. The boys, he wrote, have got an auntie here that would like to get them to care for. Write us at once. But the letter was written on the same day that Reuben's indenture contract was signed. Apparently, the 2 boys never knew, even as adults, that their family had tried to get them back. What must those early experiences have done to the boys' sense of belonging, of finding a place where they felt at home? They might even have arrived at the orphanage speaking only Swedish, making their situation even harder. They must have felt utterly displaced. They were together at the orphanage only 1 year. Then Howard was there alone for 2 years. Reuben had the good fortune of being taken in by a family that wanted a companion for their little girl. Howard was not so lucky. When he was 8 years old, a contract of indenture for him was signed, and off he went to live with a widowed woman, Mrs. Gild, on a farm. By law, he had to go to school until he was 14, but a huge loophole meant that only 1 day of attendance a month satisfied the law. The orphanage staff did check up on his well-being with once-a-year visits. Records filed by state agents indicated that Howard was regarded as stubborn, willful, and headstrong. Somehow, he managed to keep his spirit from being broken. You might be wondering how I have copies of those records. Amazingly, I found out that they could be purchased through the online gift shop of the Minnesota Historical Society. When Howard was 16 years old, he apparently had had enough of doing farm work essentially for free, because he went through the steps to be declared an emancipated minor. Mrs. Gild was not pleased. She even begrudged him the prorated $75 she owed him for his 8 years of labor and thought that he should pay her. The orphanage staff had to set her straight. He also was owed 2 suits of clothes. Okay, Mary, if you could put up the photo of Howard at about that age. Yeah, it's photo number 1. So you can see it on the right there. And you can see that his suit is shabby and ill-fitting. If you can see the whole photo, which you can't there, it's darned in places. There are a little patch here and there. And he does not look happy. In all those years, Howard had not forgotten Reuben. When he was 13, he told the state agent who visited that he was, quote, very anxious to correspond with his brother Reuben. He actually had to get permission from both his guardian and Reuben's guardian just to be able to write to his own brother. At that point, the brothers hadn't seen each other in 7 years. And quite frankly, Reuben had pretty much forgotten Howard. He was younger. He was in a happy situation. Finally, they were reunited, and they stayed in touch throughout the rest of their lives. Here's the next photo of the brothers as young men. Howard's on the left, and Reuben is on the right. Howard looks quite serious. And even though Reuben is not smiling, he looks affable, you know? My brother have gone on 2 family history road trips in the U.S. We have visited the museum for the Minnesota State Orphanage, the very small town where Howard was indentured, and the graveyard for the State Insane Asylum where Howard's mother's grave was marked with only a number. We also have written a booklet about Howard's parents and have given it to interested relatives. I did not know my Grandpa Larson well in person. While I was growing up, he lived in Wisconsin, and I mostly lived in San Diego. But when I was in high school, my family lived for 2 years in the Midwest, near older relatives, including my grandpa, and I started asking questions about family history. And I feel as though I've gotten to know him better through everything I've discovered about him through my brothers and my research. From Grandpa's example, I've learned what it means to persevere, not to give up, no matter how hard the situation in which you find yourself. I would be pleased to be remembered after I'm gone as stubborn, willful, and headstrong. Sounds like a good epitaph to me.
Hello, my name is Lorie Clark, and I'm a genealogy enthusiast. I've only been doing this for about 3 years. Hopefully I'll become a professional one day. I wanted to know my history, and tracing my ancestry came about to look for my mom's Canadian side of the family. The Finnish side had already been traced, way back to 1250, I believe. To top that off, I know little about either side of my dad's family, and set about to find out about the Fettys and the Clarks. My father's mother, who was a Fetty, died in the Spanish flu in October 1918. My father was 2 years old and lived with the Fettys permanently. Mary, can you put the first slide of my aunt up? That's my great aunt Cleo. She was 13 when my father was left at 2 to live with his grandparents, the Fettys. I'm going to talk about my grandmother's sister, Aunt Cleo, who became my grandmother figure, Cleopatra Helen Fetty. Second slide, please. I know her as Aunt Cleo, and she was a part of me from the age of 1. When my dad moved the family from Berkeley, California, to Forest Grove, Oregon. Yes, I grew up around here. It was for a job and likely to be near Aunt Cleo. We lived in their house on 14th Avenue in Forest Grove. There were many family gatherings in that house during the holidays, and I would float from lap to lap out of curiosity. Thinking back, I was wondering, who are those people? Some I would only see during the holidays over the next few years. It was usually my Aunt Cleo's family and or friends. Third slide, please, Mary. My memories with Aunt Cleo were at her house, and she's on the left, and that's my Uncle Aaron, her husband, on the right. One of the first was the Columbus Day storm that I remember in her duplex. There was a huge plate glass window, and I just stood there with my curly red hair and diapers, watching the trees bend and sway. And oh, I want to tell you, the adults were pretty scared. There were shingles flying from people's rooftops into that big window, and I just stood there watching as they hit the window. And I was excited about that, and go figure. I wasn't afraid of anything. Another thing, she had this big old blue truck. It was a 48 Chevy called Old Blue. I was 3 years old, and I literally had to crawl up into this thing, sat in the middle of this seat, and I guess, because I looked this up, it's the first time that it was a bigger seat in this. And it had a choke push button thing or something on the dash. I looked this up too, and there's a throttle button on the bottom, and it was a cranky old thing to start. You had to choke it and pull it and choke it and pull it to get it going. And then you had to let it sit there and idle for, I don't know, 5 minutes, what seemed like forever to a 3-year-old. We would go to a nursery because she worked in nurseries, and with her bandana and tied in her hair, we would drive down the road, and I could barely see anything except the sky through that big window. There were no seat belts either. I was sliding around on the seat, and I loved to take rides in that thing, of course. And other times, we would go to the store. We took many trips around town over a few years, and until I started school. When I would spend the night, she would make me cut apples for a snack. That was one of the best snacks, with that colored sugar, you know, the green and red sugar with the big crystals. Not that I needed any sugar by any means, because I was still and am pretty energetic. I would eat them while she did the laundry, cooked, or washed dishes. And now I understand that is how she kept an eye on me. She read me fairy tales like Little Boy Blue, Come Blow Your Horn, or Little Jack Horner. You get the drift. She told me stories about 2 one-foot-tall ceramics she called Pinky and Blue Boy. Not sure if there was an actual story about them to this day. And gosh, what cherished memories. I loved going to her house, and she had these National Geographics lined up, hundreds of them. And I just wanted to get my little hands on those and look at those because there was so much history there. During Christmas, she had a large ceramic nativity that she created. I inherited all of this. I also have her Kimmel collection. That is the only thing I have in my hands due to some life circumstances. She was a gardener and a potter. She and my uncle owned a market in Cornelius. That was back in the 50s, and it is not used as such today. It's, I think, a storage shed for Mike's cabinets, but the building still stands. It is on the corner of North 4th Avenue and West Baseline Street. I think of Aunt Cleo and Uncle Aaron when I drive by. Lastly, she would often sing and hum old songs. Tell me what a beautiful voice that my grandmother had. I did not hear many stories about my grandmother, except that she sang and had a beautiful voice. Maybe that is why I love to sing so much. Maybe that's why I've been singing in choirs since grade school, even in the military, why I joined our choir here. It is a way for me to keep the memories alive and Grandma close to my heart. It is hard not to mention my grandmother when talking about Aunt Cleo. Aunt Cleo was who I feel is the closest thing I had as a grandmother ever on both sides of the family. All my grandparents, except one, were gone.
And now, please join us in singing our closing hymn. It's in the Teal hymnal, number 1001, Breaths. Please stand for the hymn. Thank you. Be seated.
Our chalice extinguishing reading was written by Layla Derlin Jones. For those who came before us, we offer gratitude and thanks. May their memories be a blessing.